This is the Chris Stigall Show podcast.
Okay, guys, let's just rip. And Chris Stigall.
Chris Stigall. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Chris Stigall.
I'm joined now by Chris Stigall.
Now, he puts the broad in broadband. It's Chris Stigall.
The Chris Stigall podcast is presented by usmedicalplan.com. Save big money monthly and get better health coverage at usmedicalplan.com.
Glad to have you here on this 31st day of July, the last one. Hey, welcome into the Chris Stigall Show podcast. Thanks for downloading this, and thanks a lot for giving it a 5-star review and written reviews at both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you have not given this 5 stars at Apple Podcasts, could you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the menu of shows and do that? Maybe write a little something, anything. I don't care, hopefully nice. But your reviews, your 5-star reviews and your written reviews mean more than anything I can say about the show. So I always appreciate your help when you're promoting the show. Coming up today, do you remember the testimony last week, if you were paying attention on Capitol Hill, on the gender dysphoria stuff, as well as female athletes competing, men in their locker rooms? Paula Scanlan, a former University of Pennsylvania swimmer, she was one of the teammates with this person we call Leah Thomas. Just tremendous testimony yesterday. Sam Ponder, Sage Steele on ESPN both took notice, called her testimony brave, and it was good stuff. We have Paula on the show today. Also, you're going to hear from Jen Sey. Jennifer is the former executive at Levis, who really was tossed from Levi's for speaking out about keeping public schools open during COVID. Now she has kind of unintentionally wandered into this discussion about women and men and competitive sports, as she was also, in addition to being a Levi's executive, she was also formerly a gold medalist in women's gymnastics and sounded the alarm on a lot of the sexual abuse in women's gymnastics long before, the current era that we find ourselves in. So she's a fascinating lady, a lot to talk about. And, it's timely because I had a conversation just yesterday in church I want to tell you a little more about with a woman who, and she listens regularly, so again, I don't want to make an example of her, but it's an important conversation. And I think there are still some people maybe on our side who are confused about what this really means from a spiritual perspective or a political perspective, and I'll explain more about that coming up. But first, let me tell you about John Ruhlman, the guy who runs usmedicalplan.com. usmedicalplan.com is the website. Better to call today at 877-410-4321. Are you a younger person and you buy your own health insurance? Have you called John? You say, no, I'm happy with my insurance. Well, is it going to cover you if you need it? Will it pay you if you're hospitalized? Do you know there are insurance programs out there if you're a young, healthy person that will pay you money if you're knocked out for some health reason? If you're a senior and you're on a fixed income and you got to buy a supplemental plan, calling John could save you 30 to 60% a month. I mean, substantial money. I know personally there are people in my life who, quite frankly, have saved the equivalent of a mortgage payment every month by calling John and getting more affordable and better health insurance coverage through one of his 80 health insurance providers. Just one simple phone call saved them a mortgage payment a month. No joke. That could be you. Never substandard care. You're never going to lose quality. He's going to assure you of that. And, maybe the phone call is to find out that, yeah, you've got the best possible insurance, but it's pretty likely he can find you better rates and better coverage. You've just got to make that phone call. 877-410-4321 or usmedicalplan.com. Ron DeSantis finally sat down with Megyn Kelly. Did you watch this? I saw some of it. Megyn Kelly was kind of poking at DeSantis for not sitting down with her. So she finally got the interview. Was it contentious? To be truthful, I've not watched it all. I've seen a couple of clips, but were tough questions asked. I mean, she kind of made it sound like he was afraid to sit down with her. So did something big come of it?
Not more than what was floating around, I don't think.
All right. Well, here's a little of that, if you're curious.
To protect women and girls from men who claim they are trans trying to get into our spaces and our sports.
Well, in Florida, we've done all of that. So girls' sports, women's sports is protected. Men can't be injecting themselves into those competitions. It takes away opportunities for girls and for women athletes. And we did that years ago here as governor. We've also protected the locker rooms and the bathrooms so that men are not going into women's, very sensitive places. And I think that should be, the rule, period. We will look within the constitutional authority of the federal government. We'll look to do the same for women's sports and those issues nationally.
Title IX?
Yeah, I think so.
There was an ad recently released that was controversial online that portrayed you as a warrior against certain these LGBTQ issues, and Trump is soft on them. The New York Times reports that you were actually behind that ad, your campaign. You definitely promoted it and defended it. Do you think that Trump is soft on this issue, the issue of trans rights versus women's rights?
Well, I think that what was pointed out there was, he had been a pioneer in injecting men into women's competitions because, he was doing that with beauty pageants way back in the day, 10 years ago or whatnot. And then he's also opposed things like protecting locker rooms and bathrooms when he was running. He said North Carolina shouldn't have done that when they did it. So that, I think, is not where our voters are on that.
I need to go back and refresh my memory on the North Carolina law because I do remember at the time, I think DeSantis is correct about that. This goes back to before his first election. And that was a big debate. Remember the transgender bathrooms in North Carolina? They were the first state to start discussing it, I think. And I do think DeSantis is correct that Trump initially, I don't remember exactly where he came down on that. Now, if you asked him today, if he's asked about it, he will say he opposes it. I don't know. I've told you that on this issue, on this cultural issue, DeSantis is much stronger. He just is. It's not debatable. And any Trump supporter, and I'm a Trump enthusiast, but I'm going to be honest, DeSantis owns Trump on this issue. He just does. And they know it. And I've seen the focus group on it. I've seen it. I've literally sat in a room of Trump voters who are asked about this issue and where does Trump stand, and they go, oh. Because when they're asked to, okay, show us exactly where has Trump stood up and fought this, you can't. Now, on other issues, as has been appropriately pointed out, Donald Trump assembled the Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade. So it's like, that's the big social issues feather in his cap that is, the ultimate body slam of social issues, as far as I'm concerned, for the conservative right. But on this trans thing, DeSantis is stronger. I'm not saying Trump, but here's the other thing. I don't think that, as much as it confuses me, much like COVID and this trans thing, for whatever reason, don't seem to be the needle mover that I would have thought they would be. Abortion seems to be, but not the trans thing and not COVID. I've seen no evidence it's moving massive voter blocks one way or the other. You might disagree with me emotionally, and I respect that, but now when you inject it into public schools, that is different. I think the moms and the public school angle, Glenn Youngkin is certainly an example of that. When you talk about public schools, different matter. But as a cultural matter, it's interesting. Somebody said to me just yesterday in church that they were listening to my interview with Ollie last week, guy who's gone through 32 reconstruction surgeries to become a woman, and now ultimately today sees how mentally unbalanced that was and how when he was young, people got a hold of him and really manipulated him, and he wished he'd had better counsel. Today he wants to be a married father someday to a woman. It was a great conversation, and we talked a lot about his spiritual walk, coming to Christ. I asked him how parents can deal with this. A woman stops me in church, and she said, Chris, I heard you talking about this, and I'm really glad that you brought up that our pastor talks about this with regularity, but does it in a kind way, in a gentle way. He's firm about it, but he's not unkind. It's not hateful. It's not about being unwelcoming, or if you're trans or whatever, you're welcome into the church. It's just a consistent message that it's wrong. He does address it quite a bit. He has in this last year talked about this quite a bit. I don't know if I can quantify how many times, but quite a bit. This woman says to me in church, she said, I've been struggling because I've had people say to me, that, gosh, I like your pastor and I like this church, but he's so obsessed with these cultural issues. He just keeps talking about this stuff. And I wish he'd stop it. And I can't. And this woman is really in agony over this because she, like me, really likes her pastor, but she's asking me privately, like, what do I think about the fact that there are people that don't like being in our church because our pastor's too pushy on this issue? And I said, all due respect to your friends who are sensitive or tired or whatever. I was talking about this with Christine. I said, what do you think it is about people that would come into a church and say, where does that preacher get off talking about all this trans stuff? Like, whose mentality? Who has that mentality? And Christine's genuinely trying to get into their mindset. She says, I don't know, Chris, maybe it's just that people go into church and they feel like, I get this all week long. I just don't want to be confronted with it on Sunday. And I said, well, bless her heart, she's trying to represent the other side. It's not what she believes. She's just trying to play devil's advocate for me for a minute. I'm about to come out of my skin. I go, well, where are you going to get it if not church? Where the hell are you going to go to get an opposing view to this madness if not church? And for people to say, I'm tired, quit bringing this up from the pulpit. Where else but our spiritual leaders are we going to tackle this? Who else is doing it? The GOP? Who's really in a meaningful way? Who's combating this? And if you don't deal with it spiritually, if you're not a spiritual person, I'm not talking to you, okay? Like if you're an atheist or you're not a believer or whatever, just have a seat for a second. I'll get right back to you. For the rest of us who are actually believers in a creator, if your spiritual leader is not addressing this head on, he or she, all due respect, is not doing their job. We're in the midst of a cultural and spiritual battle, the likes of which I've not seen. I'm not saying it's not, it's not unprecedented. The Bible is rife with stories like it. But if your spiritual leader's not tackling this head on, I don't think they're doing their job right now. And the notion that, well, young people, they don't want to hear this stuff. It's too confrontational. Somebody that's very close to me, and I don't mean to, she's a regular listener here, so I don't want to upset. But this is instructive. You know what she said? I think maybe, it doesn't really come up too much in my church because our preacher stays away from politics. And I thought, what an interesting observation. Our preacher stays away from politics. Doesn't talk about transgenderism. Our preacher stays away from politics. You hear that? And I quickly would just gently say, oh, careful. This is not politics. Now, Democrats have made it political. This is not politics. This is about going right at the heart of what we believe as Christians in a creator. And they have tried to use it as a political weapon and a political cudgel. And Democrats have taken up this Marxist attack on our spirituality and our faith, an attack on a creator and the notion of being created in the image of God, uniquely designed and without flaw. They've made it political. Be very careful here. It's been my pleasure and honor to talk about Bob Spinato at Williamsburg Dental in Broomall, just off the Blue Route, as my dentist and friend of over 12 years now. But now he has two brand new associates, his daughter Alexa and Dr. Geddes. Tell him about him, Bob.
Yeah, it's really a thrill for me to have both the dentists, my daughter and Dr. Jared Geddes. One of the things that I love about them both is when they don't have a patient in their chair, they're in my room watching what I do and trying to learn from me. And we hear enough about the new generation and they think they know everything and they don't want to work. And I've got two dentists who are really, really want to learn and really, really willing to work hard. And I enjoy learning from them. They brought some new skills and some new technologies to our office that will be great benefits to our patients. And so, if anything, I think that having them both there is going to expand and lengthen my career as opposed to shorten my career.
Pick up the phone or go online, make that appointment, 610-353-2700 or williamsburg-dental.com. You know our next guest, if you've been a regular listener for a while now, she wrote a great book, a bestseller as a matter of fact, during her tenure as one of the chief executives, really on her way to running the entire Levi's organization. And then COVID. Seems like so many stories end or begin with, and then COVID. Levi's Unbuttoned is her book. The woke mob took my job, but gave me my voice. And the fascinating thing about Jen Sey, we learned in the first interview about her, and in subsequent conversations, there's much more to her than just being of the corporate world and standing up and speaking on behalf of school children who were locked out of their schools during COVID. She also comes to the table as a world-class athlete. And we talked a little about it, but I haven't explored it nearly to the extent that, frankly, she's due, as she in 1986 was a gymnast gold medalist in the United States gymnastics. She was a gold medalist, for Pete's sakes. So what a multifaceted career, and she has kind of stepped into the arena of ideas on not just COVID, but now this gender transitioning stuff, a little verbal back and forth with the women's soccer star, Megan Rapinoe. So Jen Sey, welcome back to the show. I really appreciate your time today. Hi.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. That whole back and forth was totally inadvertent on my part, to be clear, but we can talk about that.
I think it's really, I mean, as a believer personally, as a Christian, I think that sometimes God really has a funny way of stepping in and making us unintentional warriors for truth and justice and light where it's called for. Don't mean to rope you into my theology, but that's what I believe. And it seems like you were on a trajectory to run a big company, and now your life has taken on an entirely different meaning. And I would argue one, maybe not as financially gratifying, but one that is certainly more important to the culture.
Yeah, this is certainly not what I thought I'd be doing in my sort of mid-50s. I thought, I'd spent 23 years at Levi's. I started as an entry-level marketing assistant and worked my way all the way up the ladder. And I loved the company. I loved the brand. People ask me all the time, do you still wear Levi's? I do. I love the product, and I came to love the brand and have a significant hand in sort of crafting what the brand's meaning is in this modern era. And I thought I'd stay, whether I became CEO or not, which was certainly on the table. I thought I would end my career there. And I certainly didn't think, I would spend the next however long I'm going to spend, being a finger in the eye of people who I perceive as saying untrue things. And I think you make a really good point, because for a lot of folks, they might go, well, okay, she was this like COVID dissenter. She was saying children were going to be harmed with long-term public school closures, which we know is true. That is exactly what happened. Why is she talking about this other issue now? And I think the underlying issue is the denial of truth in favor of ideology. And I can't abide by that, because harms are done when we deny a thing like truth and just abandon the very pursuit of it. That's really incredibly harmful. So, that's why these two things, I guess, are related, and why I eventually couldn't stay quiet on, the gender ideology issues, specifically as it pertains to women's sports and women's spaces.
U.S. National Gymnastics, 1986. You were a gold medalist, and, subsequently in years past, years that passed later, some very high-profile women's gymnasts became news as the horrific story of Larry Nassar and what our FBI knew about that and the sexual abuses. You were one of the first people to speak up about that years ago, well before it exploded onto the national scene. And I'm going to make maybe a bit of a stretch here, but I don't think it is. And I'm going to see whether you confirm it or not. The importance of being a woman, the significance, the relevance, the uniqueness of being a woman, as you talk about these abuses, I should think are part of the reason this notion that men can be women is so offensive to you. That's my guess. Is that a stretch?
What's offensive to me is they can't be.
Well, that's right.
It's just a basic denial of truth.
But doesn't it make a mockery of the uniqueness of what women do struggle and battle? I think it mocks women.
I think that's fair. And generally, I find it to be fairly retrograde, because the presentation, if we talk about Dylan Mulvaney, for instance, it's a fairly kind of frivolous representation of what a woman is. It's a superficial representation of what a woman is that we have, and I would proudly call myself a feminist, which may be controversial to some conservatives, which is why I don't really fit in any box. But that's what we've been sort of fighting against for decades. What a woman is. There are basic truths biologically that I can express in behavior, in dress, in, attitude, a full range of, presentations. I don't have to wear frilly dresses. I'm still a woman. It's something so much more kind of fundamental than what I wear. That's insulting to me.
Yes. And but also when you say things like men can menstruate or give birth.
Yeah.
That's just it. I mean, of course it's ridiculous, but.
Well, the fact that sentence can exist and be defended by anyone is such a warping of truth that it's hard not to laugh at it.
Do you, this gets sticky because I don't mean to debate politics with you either. I know you say you're a feminist. I think in the traditional sense, you're what maybe would be called a classical liberal. I think you probably voted for Democrats most of your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do feminists, true classical liberal feminists, are they, I mean, I know Dr. Naomi Wolf, who we've interviewed, for instance. I know she does. I know you do. Do you think most classical liberal feminists see this the way you do, or feel like they shouldn't speak, or what do you think?
I think that they do, and I think we're called TERFs.
Yes,
that's what gets sort of weaponized against us, and I've decided not to care. It's a silly name.
J.K. Rowling, right? J.K. Rowling is called a TERF. That's called trans exclusionary radical feminist, by the way, for those of you that aren't hip enough to know the acronym.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a radical idea to say that there are fundamental biological differences between men and women. That is not a radical idea, and I don't need to be a doctor to know that that's true. That was fact up until 5 minutes ago. The idea that there can be a sentence that men can have children, or men can menstruate, or men can breastfeed, it's such a denial of basic truth. And I think what's so disturbing to me, if we go back to my COVID dissenting, there were so many fundamental lies at the heart of all the harms caused. Children were not at risk. Children were not resilient enough to withstand the isolation and lack of schooling, and it harmed the most vulnerable children the most. But there was a fundamental lie at the core of it, which allowed government and public health to kind of further these really harmful policies. And so I just think it's critical to push back on any lie that's central to policy. And here's the thing about this sort of the gender biology right now, or the gender ideology right now. The battle is, should a trans athlete be able to compete in women's sports? But the lie at the center of it is that there is no biological difference. So what that says to me is that ultimately there will be no gender categories in sports. There will be no gender categories to protect women's spaces. And that to me is fundamentally unfair and dangerous.
Jen Sey is with us. She is author of a book called Levi's Unbuttoned. The woke mob took my job but gave me my voice. There were hearings on actually both of these wheelhouse subjects for you in the last few days. There was a hearing on school closures and the devastating effects there. The headline from Yahoo News, incidentally, this is a Yahoo News headline, so not like Fox News or some conservative outlet. Democrats defend pandemic school closures.
Yeah. I saw that.
That's remarkable, actually. I mean, given all we know now. I mean, the stats are out. The studies have been done.
It is. I mean, that's the thing is once you sort of dig in on a lie, you'll kind of defend it to the death. Like I think it was Congressman Bowman that made a totally unfounded statement that there would have been significantly more death had schools been open, which is profoundly untrue. And there's plenty of evidence to support the fact that that is untrue, both in our own country, because states like Florida, but not just Florida, which is obviously the center of the controversy because of the governor, being, punching back, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was basically all the red states. But let's take it out of America. You have all of the Northern European countries, which also opened within the first 4 to 6 weeks of COVID and did not have higher death rates. And we have the facts and figures now, and you have to look at them not for a limited period of time, but over the course of the entire 3 years that we've just been through. And when you normalize for age and all of that, COVID, Florida's rate of death is lower than the national average by a significant margin. I mean, there's just no facts to support what he said. But that's the problem. Truth doesn't matter. They'll just keep saying a lie, and they have to be called out for it, because otherwise they can do it again. They can close the schools again for any reason they want, for climate, for any reason.
The schools are also a flashpoint on the transgender stuff, as you know, because there's now great debate in some states. I mean, for heaven's sakes, there are governors talking about, well, Gavin Newsom's one, I think, and I think there's another conversation in Massachusetts about making it almost criminal of parents to either stop or get involved with kids who want to transition. I mean, it's almost if kids want to talk to their teacher in private about transitioning their gender, as if you even can, that's not only allowed, it's encouraged, and sometimes I guess we're told to keep that from parents. Teachers are. And if parents get involved and object, that's almost criminal abuse, some are now saying. I mean, that's how insane it's getting.
Yeah, some states are calling that criminal, and the children, I think, in California, for instance, can be taken from the home.
Yeah.
And, replaced with foster parents, or, somehow become wards of the state, I suppose. I just, when it comes to schools, our children can't read. We are in absolute crisis mode. They can't do basic math. They're graduating from high school without basic skills, and all of this accelerating got so much worse in the last 3 years with school closures. Why are we doing anything in school but that?
Beautifully
I mean,
said.
honestly, without sort of wading into the controversy, we are in absolute crisis. Our kids do not have the basic skills to survive in the world. I don't understand why we're focused on anything but that.
And then to the athletics side of this, as a young woman who competed and at a very high level competed, when you hear some of these swimming seems to be of all the sports for some reason. I don't know a lot about swimming, and I didn't know, but I've interviewed more women who swim lately on this subject than maybe any other sport. But it's certainly not unique and exclusive to women's swimming. What about gymnastics? I don't know. Can you imagine having been a young girl competing and a biological male in your locker room?
Gymnastics is an interesting one because the sport is actually different for men and women.
Mm-hmm.
They do different events. Men do 6 events, women do 4, men do rings, women do not. And the reason the sport is actually different is because of the biological differences.
Yeah.
That is why. So it's kind of the proof case, if you will, that there are essential differences. I mean, I don't think you're going to find any women wanting to compete in men's gymnastics. They simply couldn't compete. Now, my concern if this issue, and I don't think you're going to find many men wanting to compete in women's gymnastics, because women's gymnastics is much more tailored to women's strengths. There's flexibility and grace and all of these other kind of aspects of the sport in women's. They do things
and
like
am I right also, Jen, that you're typically they're much more petite and can move faster and be more nimble and agile competitively than a bigger man? Yeah.
Yeah, they are. I think my concern in gymnastics in particular is the sport has really changed over the last 20 years. And the artistic aspect of the sport, and this is criticized by some of the older gymnasts like myself, that has fallen by the wayside a little bit. And it is much more about power and strength and speed. They don't do compulsories anymore. Compulsories, think of it as like figure eights in ice skating. It was sort of a technique driven kind of exercise. They only do what are called optionals, which favor really difficult tricks, as we call them. It's more fun to watch on television. That's part of it. And so my fear is, given that's where the sport has gone anyway, a man could win in that context within women's gymnastics.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I mean, right now the sport, like I said, it's completely different for men and women. So I feel like it's, again, the proof case for the fact that there are biological differences, at least like we even need a proof case. I mean, it's so silly.
Yeah.
I think it's less of an issue in gymnastics, but I think there needs to be sort of clarity across all sports, because the fact is the only place this goes if we deny biology, which is not just about testosterone. But men, on average, are faster, stronger, all of these things. If we deny that, women's sports will be eliminated eventually. It just will.
I don't see how you see it any other way. I agree with you completely. And then just kind of the casual normalizing of biological men being in changing areas, showering areas, locker room areas with young women. I find that, I mean, the fact that not every man in the country doesn't stand up and fight this is infuriating to me. When I hear of male coaches that kind of shrug and ignore it when a female protests and doesn't come to their aid, I don't know. I've asked for quite a while, where are the men in this subject? It's a shame that women are left to their own devices to have to fight it. I don't think men should be silent here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some are not silent, but I think people saw it as sort of a fringe issue. I mean, I'll admit, quite a few years ago, I did.
Sure.
There were a handful of cases, and it kind of lined up with what Megan Rapinoe, the U.S. Women's World Cup soccer player, said recently. Where are all the trans athletes trying to kind of break into women's sports? That's sort of how I thought of it 5 or 6 years ago. But now I see it happening across sports, and it's happening across women's spaces. And you're seeing biological men enter women's spaces and put women in harm's way, whether it's locker rooms or prisons or women's shelters. And I just don't think it's not fringe anymore. That sort of inevitable endpoint of not having separate women's spaces. And for anyone that thinks I'm being an alarmist on this, I mean, there was an article written in The Atlantic, which is a credible publication. You may like it, you may not, but it's not fringe, right?
No.
The proposition, this was written last September by an actual reporter. The headline was "Separating Sports by Sex Doesn't Make Sense." That was the headline. And she went on to try to make the case that there should be no gender categories in sports. Because there's no proof, she said, that there was any advantage, which is, for men in women's sports, which is a lie. So that is where this goes eventually. And of course it goes to no safe women's spaces. And I just think men need to get involved in this fight as well, because it really is a fight for truth.
Yeah, we're at a place where we're telling women men can be women and men can make better women. That's where we're going. I said last week or a couple of weeks ago, just like you, Megan Rapinoe suggesting that, I'd welcome biological men to play here and U.S. women's soccer. And I say, well, that's fine for you to say now at the end of your career. Let's talk about you coming up with a roster full of men on the opposing side of the pitch from you. Let's talk about what that would be for you. And would you shine and be the star that you are today in the sport if you had a roster of biological men playing against you, which, in fact, they have. People like to point out that they did practice against a team of 15-year-old boys, I think, and lost rather handily.
Yeah, in 2017, I think they lost 5-2 to a team of high school boys that were of, average reputation. I don't think they were even a sort of stellar high school boys team. But the examples abound. I mean, both Serena and Venus Williams, they had challenged back in 1998, kind of a battle of the sexes type competition, and they said they could beat anyone outside of the men's top 200, which already would say, even if they did, would they rank inside the top 200 if they had? They lost, both of them, 6-1 and 6-2. And then you have Allison Felix, who's the most decorated female track athlete. She's won more medals in the Olympics than any other track athlete. And her best time in the 400 meters has been beaten 15,000 times by men and boys. Not only would she not make an Olympic team, she wouldn't make the high school podium.
Yeah, we can't do this to girls. I mean, your mission continues. I got to say, every time we talk and meet and I read you in a headline, I kind of marvel at what became sort of a gentle stance on school closures has now you've become sort of a full-throated cultural figure now, whether you want to be or not.
I guess.
So what's next for you? What are you doing these days? You've left corporate America. While I've got you, and I guess we're talking about it quickly, the Bud Light phenomenon, the Target phenomenon, the Kohl's stuff. Yeah. When you read these corporate big companies like you came from, getting engaged in these culture fights, seemingly sometimes on purpose, Are they purposely choosing it? And can you confirm that they just don't give a damn? We want to have the fight even if it costs us money? Can you confirm that or no?
I don't think that's quite it. I know some people think that, and I admit I could be wrong. But I think, one, they live in a bubble and everyone they know agrees with them. And so they don't really think there's meaningful, thoughtful pushback. It's like cretinous people who just don't know any better, so we don't care about them anyway. That's the first thing. And they get a lot of praise within their social circle, within the media, for taking what they perceive as these progressive stances. And I think it's also a shield for less savory, business practices, because they sort of present themselves as a champion of the people, but in fact, they're less pro-worker CEOs than they've ever been. CEO compensation has risen dramatically over the last 20 years. So they aren't really for the people. They aren't really for the workers, but they want to kind of present themselves as such. So I think it's kind of a shield. And I think for a while it worked. And, the viewpoint is also simultaneously that this is what most good people think. And so if we align ourselves with these values, we'll make more money and we'll sell more stuff. So it's a craven, calculation. And now they're learning a lot of people don't agree, and they are well within their rights then to reject that product. So, but they're so in the bubble, they can't kind of see their way past it. And I think ultimately they are driven by money and profit. Even the banks that are funding them and the financial institutions that are funding them, they saw this as a money-making proposition. And I think when it becomes very clear that it's not, they're going to have to change course.
So as an executive, when you see Bud Light do what they did with, no matter what you think, I mean, even if you think it was sort of, I know some people say, it was a little gimmicky thing. It was one can. It wasn't like every can on the store shelves. So people blew it up. I mean, whatever you want to interpret it as, is there any doubt that was one of the biggest colossal errors in marketing history?
Oh, it'll be written about in textbooks, I'm most certain. And it does not seem to be abating in terms of the business declines. And why that one in particular was the flashpoint. Because others haven't persisted. Other business declines have not persisted in the same way that Bud Light has. But when you have a brand that is, a broad reach brand that's about being for everyone and has a kind of history of, being funny and welcoming and warm, and their whole brand idea was rooted in humor, when you put forth a really polarizing ideology. And the fact is what people are rejecting is what you and I have been discussing. They're rejecting the idea that men can be women. They're not rejecting inclusion. They're not rejecting any of that. Just they're rejecting the very fundamental idea that men can actually be women.
Don't you marvel, Jen Sey, at these marketing gurus that are hired and paid, I would assume, rather handsomely? They come from Ivy League institutions, and they say publicly, they say things like, Bud Light's always been this sort of fratty, male-driven brand. And I just think, do the other fellow executives inside Budweiser go, oh, no, I can't believe she just said that?
Well, they didn't.
Yeah, no, they didn't.
She said that a few days before the Mulvaney promotion was in the market. And to me, that alone is a fireable offense. That kind of disregard and disrespect for your consumer who pays the bills and keeps the lights on. That said, I can only imagine she felt sort of encouraged, and that the conversations in the hallowed halls of Bud Light kind of furthered that perspective. So she felt okay saying it. You could look at it as an employee gone rogue, but I don't think that's probably it. She said the quiet part out loud. And I think the conversations in the halls are, we don't like that guy. We need a new customer. Oh, and by the way, we also need to get, high ESG and DEI scores and all of these things from HRC and all these organizations that rank companies. So, when you're chasing those scores, which we absolutely did at Levi's, that endorses that perspective. And, so I feel in a sense a little bad for her, because while I think she acted alone and had full permission to kind of hire whatever influencer she wanted to, it was a viewpoint that had to have already been endorsed within the company.
I think I've asked you this before, but I'll ask again. Can corporate America, can you run a company, a big company in 2023 and say, to hell with ESG scores? to hell with all of this stuff. We're not participating here. Can you do that, or do you not have that autonomy, particularly if you're a publicly traded company?
It's a good question. I think we're going to find out. You have all of these, parallel economy companies developing. And I think it's important to remember also that I think most companies still play it straight up the middle and just talk about product. If you look at the Bud Light situation, the companies that are gaining share, the brands that are gaining share, Miller Lite, Coors Light, Modelo, they're not weighing in on culture issues. They're just talking about the beer and making funny ads. Mm-hmm. That's how they're winning. So I think that's are they chasing scores? I don't know. I don't know what their practices are internally. Beer is not my category. But they're really playing it straight up the middle, or kind of doing what I call normie capitalism. They're just focused on product, unifying marketing, and treating employees well. So I think that's the answer.
Eureka. Jennifer Sey. Hey, how novel. Maybe you'll start teaching business courses, I hope, someday in academe. Levi's Unbuttoned, or maybe you already do. The woke mob took my job but gave me my voice. Levi's Unbuttoned. Get that book. It's done very, very well. I'm happy for you. Always grateful for your perspective, Jen. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Nice to chat with you.
20 years in business. Congratulations to Mike Lindell and MyPillow. 80 million pillows sold over those 20 years. Can you believe that number? Well, Mike and his team at MyPillow, they want to thank each and every one of you for giving them such success over these many years. And now they want to celebrate by giving you the lowest price in MyPillow history. He told me that if you call or log on to MyPillow.com or call them today, you'll get a queen-size MyPillow to celebrate their 20 years in business for just $19.98. 20 years and just about $20 with tax. How about that? $19.98, that's it, for a queen-size MyPillow. Do you know the regular price of this thing is almost $50 more? So you're talking about a $50 discount. By the way, for the king size, you'll get it for just $10 more, $29.98. It's a huge sale. And incidentally, in addition to these pillows that are deeply discounted right now, you go to MyPillow.com and you'll get a discount using my name, Chris Podcast. Use that as your promo code, Chris Podcast. Click on the radio listener square and enter that. And you're talking about mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, sheets, and of course the pillows, so much more. You can try it on. If ever you've gone to MyPillow.com and you've thought to yourself, maybe it's a little expensive, now's the time. Celebrate 20 years with Mike Lindell. And know this, 10-year warranty. 10 years they warranty these things. So if they ever wear out or you have trouble, you can exchange for brand new. 60 days they let you take this stuff home, and if you don't like it, you can send it back for a full refund. So you got nothing to lose but a great night's sleep on MyPillow products. I've colleagues I've sent these My Slippers to. They love them. Christine loves hers. The sheets are comfortable. The towels are super absorbent. Even old Dean loves his dog bed. And we drink my coffee here at the office every day. I just brewed some this morning. MyPillow.com, promo code Chris Podcast, all right? With that warranty fully intact, or call 800-932-5056. 800-932-5056, promo code Chris Podcast, or MyPillow.com, promo code Chris Podcast, if you please to save.
I think by Representative Cohen admitting that we need barriers acknowledges there are biological differences between men and women. And by acknowledging that we need to have private spaces that are separate from each other, why can't we just use the locker rooms that we've always used, the men's and the women's? If you're acknowledging that we need protection and privacy from these men, then you're acknowledging that the locker rooms we've always used are the correct ones.
Give that woman a harumph, ladies and gentlemen. Her name is Paula Scanlan. She's a former University of Pennsylvania swimmer. That was her testimony before the House Judiciary Subcommittee last week. ESPN broadcaster Sam Ponder expressing her support for that woman who you just heard, Paula Scanlan. Thursday night, after the former swimmer testified, Ponder, among those who listened to the testimony during the hearing, and tweeted, "Paula, you are so brave and your voice is so important." Sage Steele, similarly, who's locking horns over this issue and other issues at ESPN, joined with her, and we're thrilled and honored to have Paula Scanlan with us this morning. Ms. Scanlan, first of all, I second what Sam Ponder said. It It really is. It's strange to say that it's brave to stand up and say women are women and men shouldn't be in women's locker rooms, but these days it's extraordinarily brave, and I commend you for it. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
Do you ever step back and think to yourself, how did we get here? Or are you young enough that you saw this coming from downtown? Because, I mean, I'm an older guy than you. I'm 46, and this seems like something fiction even 5 years ago. But maybe as a younger person, you saw this coming along some time before somebody like me? I don't know.
Maybe a little bit, but I definitely didn't think I would ever have been in a position to have to talk about this. Like, I didn't think it was going to be my swim team. I didn't think it was going to be, part of my life journey to have to speak about this. So I definitely was caught a little off guard.
Are you, how do you feel about being the public face of this, along with some of your other former colleagues? We've regularly spoken with Riley about it. Riley Gaines, who I know you know, didn't swim with her, but you know her. The few of you that have come up and become the public face of this, are you uncomfortable with it? Are you happy with it? Have you settled into it, or does it upset you?
I mean, I've settled into it in terms of I know that this is, my journey and this is my calling to work on. But Riley's talked about how she was supposed to go to dental school. I have an engineering degree, and I had a six-figure job working as an engineer before I started speaking about this. And now I've realized that I need to focus on this right now. There'll always be other opportunities for me to go back into engineering if that's what I choose. So it's definitely derailed my life in a way I definitely didn't expect. And also, when I first spoke about it, I didn't think anyone would even care what I had to say. But I found, obviously, even me being here right now has showed that people do care a lot what I have to say about this.
Yeah, they do. And I've been saying this quite a bit lately. Are you disappointed that men in the field of swimming don't seem more vocal? I would say men generally, certainly in the sports commentary. I was just discussing this. I don't, and I'm not saying private sector men, they're talk show hosts like me and others that are speaking out, and some politicians, but how about people in your own sport and people that cover sports? Men seem completely cowed and terrified to speak out. Have you noticed this?
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of male athletes that have told me that, their sponsors will drop them if they speak about this. Mm-hmm. I met an Olympian actually this past weekend, and he told me that he lost a lot of sponsorships over, not standing for BLM. So there's a lot of people who, unfortunately, it's their livelihood to make money in this. And, if you speak about this, you don't have any income, you get dropped from your team, and it derails your entire life. And I understand that fear. But it is unfortunate that we can't have open conversations and discussions about this stuff.
By the way, you've joined the Independent Women's Forum. I should have mentioned that, IWF.org, which is a great place for, women who celebrate the uniqueness of being women. I was talking with Jen Sey about this earlier. If you don't recognize the uniqueness of women, then what have you? I don't know where classical feminists go. Politically aligned Democrat women of just a few years ago said that being a woman and issues of women were more important to them than anything else. We were told, certainly during the Trump era, the first term, I mean, the pink hats, the whole thing, like women were, that was a huge sector of the electorate. They said they voted because they were scared that women's rights were going to be taken away and all of these things. In 5 years, we're now at a place where men can be women. Paula, how do you explain it?
It's completely madness. And I always joke about how in 2016 they said believe all women, and now we don't even know what a woman is. and I sometimes I'm watching movies or TV shows from even 15 years ago, and they're like, we know that they're a woman, or oh, that's a girl, or saying things like that. And now that's a controversial statement. You're not allowed to assume what anybody is or isn't anymore. You can see somebody on the street who is a woman for sure 10 years ago, and they're actually a man, or the opposite. And it's just this madness where I've studied biology, like even early in high school, and we don't even know what that is anymore. Like, what are they teaching to freshmen in high school? Because that was a huge unit, the difference between man and woman.
I'm going to veer into something for a minute, and you can say no thanks, and we can go right back on the road of the conversation. But I have to ask you, spiritually speaking, I don't know if you have a personal faith. If so, does it inform this subject for you? If not, I know people of faith do care about this. Riley and I have talked about it through the Christian prism. And I would just ask you, if it doesn't apply to you personally, do you think it important that people of faith engage in this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked in a few other things about my Catholic faith, and personally for me, it is something I struggled with at the beginning because being a Christian, you want to love and you want to care. And that was my initial approach to this situation was, okay, there's these people who want to be happy and they want my support and they want my love. And I was very giving of that. But I started to realize balancing that between what the truth is. And I knew that the truth is that you can't change your biology and men cannot become women, even if they want to. And so it was very challenging for me faith-wise at the beginning, but I do think having people of faith is important. And I know for me personally, there's other Catholic people that I've been involved with that didn't know how to react to this. The same way they felt, oh, we need to be loving, we need to be caring. So I definitely think the church needs to start thinking about how to approach this topic with that care and that love, but also understanding that the truth is very important. And so I'm still working on it. Others are still working on it. But that's definitely something I would love to see more of. And I've talked to a few other Catholic leaders about this topic, and they're definitely forming more opinions on this than I've seen previously.
Paula Scanlan, who swam for the University of Pennsylvania, she was a teammate of this person called Leah Thomas now, and testified on Capitol Hill last week. On this point, I just spoke with a woman. She's a listener, so I don't want to pick on her. She'll probably hear this conversation, but it was a very instructive conversation. She said to me, lamenting, last week when I referenced our pastor, the guy that heads our church, who speaks about these issues quite frequently from the pulpit lately. But she came to me and she said that she has friends who are a little turned off by the amount of speaking that our pastor has been doing on this in the last year or so. These are people that have kids in their 20s, maybe your age, younger. And it turns them off. It makes them feel like they're just kind of listening to I've heard it referred to as politics. I don't like, all week long I hear politics. I don't want to hear it at church. It's rubbing me wrong, or it feels controversial, or it feels confrontational. It's never done in a hateful way. It's always done in a loving and a respectful way. But I do think it important to speak about, Paula, is my point, and to back away from it because it's uncomfortable or it's, quote, political. I mean, Paula, to you, it's not political, is it?
No, but I understand why they might think that, because I did feel that way at the beginning. When I was first in this situation, I was very much didn't want to speak to people about it. I was uncomfortable by the entire situation in so many different ways. And it was not something I really wanted to talk about. But I don't think that this should be a political issue. And frankly, I have plenty of friends that are on the left side of the aisle that completely agree with me on this. Mm-hmm. They don't like the politicalization of it, obviously. And they say, I don't stand for anything Republicans believe other than this one issue. And I think that shows that maybe we should remove the political stigma from this problem and just have discussions as a society, because from my understanding, at least 90% of the world agrees.
I certainly do, and I've seen evidence to suggest you're right about that. I was looking at some of the testimony from some of the Democrats who were talking about this with you last week. This is Steve Cohen. Give me number 53 from last week. Steve Cohen, the Tennessee Democrat who we opened this segment with, Matt Gaetz was referring to it. You referred to it. This is what he said when you basically correctly pivoted and said, you're making my point for me here, Congressman. Take a listen. Do you have this number 53 from last week? 0753, Steve Cohen? No? Maybe? All right. Well, nevertheless, we do. Okay, let's go.
Transgender people have been around for a long time, and they have rights, and they need to be respected. I read Ms. Scanlan's testimony. I wasn't here to hear it, and I think Penn didn't deal with your situation like they could have and should have in putting up some type of different barriers in the women's area of the locker room. But that's another issue. But things should be dealt with in a different way. This is an easy way for people to try to get points. Pick on a minority group that is the most minority and least understood in our country.
He made your point. I mean, you dunked on him right away when you heard that. You seized on those comments. I loved it.
And I was, Matt helped me out by tossing me that question because I heard him say that. I immediately took note that he just proved my point. And so you can't speak out of turn, right? Because, you're there in respect of the representatives. So I was waiting for somebody to ask me any question at all so I could bring that up. And I was given a complete easy pass to then say what I had to say about that. So that was definitely one of the most exciting parts of the testimony in the hearing for me. To be able to do that.
It was wonderful. It was such a softball. I'm so glad you got it. Sheila Jackson Lee, and again, I don't mean to rope you into a theological discussion. That's not why you're here, Paula, but I can't stop playing this. It has haunted me all weekend long. It was number 57. She talking about religion, quote, religion, and she has spoken to lots of religious people about the issue. Take a listen to this.
I will not pretend to be a scriptured person. I am not ordained. I'm not in any leading religious organization as a religious leader. But I have spoken to persons who lead, and they've given me no evidence that this issue speaks to anyone's religion. Again, I don't pretend to know every aspect of everyone's faith.
So the theological scholar, Sheila Jackson Lee, says she's talked to lots of religious folks, lots of religious leaders, Paula, and she can find nothing in anyone's religion that objects to this. That's a remarkable thing to say. It's patently absurd and untrue. I can't speak for your faith, but I can speak for mine. And I know my religious leader stridently against this and likes to point to Genesis, by the way, as his evidence. How about you?
Yeah. Well, so my grandmother on my Taiwanese side, right? English is like her fifth language, so she doesn't say a lot in English. But when we talk to her about this issue, she says this one thing. She goes, "Oh no, why would they do that? God didn't make them that way."
Amen.
It's the one answer that she has to this.
Bless her heart.
Like, she's deeply rooted in religion on this concept because she just said that's the man and the woman. God made that. What? That's always her reaction. So I find it very funny. And obviously us as Christians, we understand this. But look at, Islam and Muslims, right? The Muslim people, they have very strong separations between man and woman, even stronger than we do in Christianity. And so yes. I don't know who she's talking to, but maybe talk to a Muslim.
That's
right?
That's exactly right. Muslims are standing up in school board meetings all over the country right now over this curriculum being shoved in their kids' schools. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and they have very fine distinctions between men and women. Like, in fact, you're not men aren't allowed to see women without their hair covering if they're not married. Mm-hmm. So what happens if you need to go into a bathroom and change that, and now there's men in the bathroom? How do you handle that, right?
Paula Scanlan with us, IWF.org, the Independent Women's Forum. What was your relationship, if any, when you were actually swimming with this person that got all this national attention, Leah Thomas?
Yeah, we weren't very close ever, really at all. Obviously, just like the normal small talk we have in the locker rooms and the team rooms and outside the pool. But for me personally, guys, it started happening, and I started feeling more strongly about that it was wrong. I really tried to keep my distance. I really just tried to just go do practice and leave as quickly as I could. Because it was uncomfortable. And that's what you were saying. A lot of people are very uncomfortable by this. And that was the best way to explain how I felt. I was incredibly uncomfortable. And, my reaction to being uncomfortable was I want to spend the least amount of time near the situation that I can.
And I don't know swimming. I've never swam professionally or casually, recreationally on a team. Never mind that. Team dynamics, I assume, are somewhat important. I mean, I know it's an individual sport, but I mean, team cohesiveness. If you've got a bunch of women on a team that are violently uncomfortable and just want to get the heck out of there, I can't imagine that's good for morale, cohesiveness, team building, all of that, no?
Yeah, no, it's really challenging. There's a lot of discussion on the team and debate and people talking about, I heard such and such opinion about this is this, a lot of talking behind people's backs. And so it definitely did hurt, I would say, hurt the team dynamic in a way that was rather negative, and I don't blame Leah for this. I don't really blame anyone, frankly, for the uncomfortability of the team dynamic. But it's just the nature of being put in a situation that's hard and having a group of women, because women like to talk and they like to gossip, and that's how the season went down.
Was there I say this with respect, but I mean, Riley has said very clearly, she said, in my competitive world against women, I'm one of the top. The man I married was not one of the top male swimmers, but if I went head to head with my husband, he'd kick my butt. She said that very clearly on the show. So I say about people like Leah Thomas, I don't know how that person stacked up against you and the rest of your team. Was he the most dominant? Was she, whatever you want to call Leah Thomas, was Leah Thomas the most dominant swimmer amongst you, being that this was a biological man?
Yes, and in fact, Leah went on to win an NCAA championship title, and that was the first ever in the history of our team.
Yeah, so
on the women's team, the first ever NCAA champion for that.
And even if your teammates supported this, they have to understand, I would guess, they'll never win anything again if biological men are allowed to swim against you. I mean, I would assume you'd understand that this is your professional and career suicide that you're watching here.
I think most people did, but there was a lot of people that just said, Leah's very talented. And to be fair, on the men's team, swimming as William, was a very, very talented swimmer. Was in the Ivy League, was no NCAA champion, but placed in the Ivy League events. Actually had a pool record on the men's side at the University of Pennsylvania pool. So if I don't know if they've updated the record board, but if you go down there's a William Thomas on the men's record board, and I'm assuming they've updated the women's side to say Leah Thomas. So was a talented swimmer, obviously not an NCAA champion. And I think there are some people who just defend that, just saying, oh, well, they're just talented on both sides. That's it. Simple as that.
Yeah, I've asked this before. Like Megan Rapinoe, or whatever you say her name, competing with the U.S. women soccer right now. She says she's all for this. And I say, well, it's fine for her to say now that she's on her way out the door of soccer. But coming up, I mean, look, everybody wants a competitive professional edge. And if we go down a road of saying that men can be women, I don't know what incentive any coach or program or team, professional or collegiate, what incentive have they to actually choose real women? Seriously.
That's what I've been saying to people, is that, okay, this happened to me at a college level. I already got into college, so in terms of like the trajectory of my life, it didn't really change much. But that being said, if this starts happening at a high school level, college coaches are going to be more incentivized to recruit men to be on the women's teams. And it's not anything against these coaches. It's not anything against these universities. It's just they're going to be better at the sport. And the coach's job is to recruit the best person that they can get on the team.
That's right.
So why would they not pick men if there are rules that are allowing that? And these people are making policies, and they're saying, okay, we should protect the Olympic level athletes. Obviously, men shouldn't compete in the Olympics. But the goal for grassroots level athletes and middle schoolers and high schoolers is to be as inclusive as possible. So they're making this argument saying, okay, let's protect the Olympians, but the young kids, they don't matter. Everybody should get to play. And that's not true, because then in terms of college recruiting, you're going to have these situations where only men are going to be on women's teams.
Yeah. And what's fair or right or nice or inclusive or tolerant about that? That's about as mean and unfair and cruel as it gets to shut women out of their own competitive sports. I can't think of anything more cruel. Paula, if I may, all due respect to you and anybody else in your sphere, it sounds like the most one of the smartest people you know is your grandmother. And I hope you take what she says and say it often and loudly, because that's some of the most sage wisdom that I've heard in this entire mess. God bless her. God bless you for telling your story.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.